I always wanted to be a journalist, but it took me a good long while before I actually got into it and before I could start any training. I think the reason I wanted it was that my grandfather, Ashley Pountney, who was the son of a convict, so I'm not far from the convict beginnings, he became the editor of some of the first newspapers in northwest New South Wales, the Werris Creek Express, the Corindi Advocate, the Murrurundi Times, and so on. So there was that heritage there. But when I was 17, just after I left school, I tramped around all the papers and magazines trying to get a cadetship, and I failed. And I think it was because although I was quite good at writing English and so on, I was a bit timid. I didn't look or sound as though I had much oomph or much drive. And so nobody took me on. So the next 6 years, I really spent doing different jobs, went overseas, worked there, gained different experience, went to university for a time, but did not complete a degree. So it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s, I was working in an office in Canberra in one of the Commonwealth hostels, and the daughter of the manager there already had a part-time job at the ABC television, which was just starting in Canberra. The radio had been going, of course, for years, but they were just starting television. And she said to me, they are looking for people to start training. Why don't you go and have a go at it? So thanks to her kind suggestion, I was able to start in Canberra. It was great to start in what was then a regional centre, because you learned a bit of everything. You know, you were answering the phone, you were learning makeup to do the weatherman, and gradually learning some interviewing, being sent out on jobs and so on. I think that was a very good training. So a few years in Canberra with the opportunities increasing, and then I was invited to come to Sydney to join the This Day Tonight program, which was something, well, it was a pioneering current affairs program. And that was a big deal to be asked to go there, especially since they were all men, and it was a team of very competitive young men. So I was thrown in the deep end. And that was, I think I had 5 years there. And then I was invited to come to join Four Corners, again, the only woman among a team of men. So in a way, I was in the right place at the right time, I think, and very grateful for that. I knew that I had been given a unique opportunity when I was invited to join the This Day Tonight team. And then after about 5 years, when I was invited to move from that program to host and report on Four Corners, I knew it was a big opportunity. And I just thought, now my job now is to do this as well as I possibly can and to get on with everybody. And I hoped that that would open the door for other women. If it did, then I'm very, very happy about that. When I joined This Day Tonight in the late 1960s, and I stayed there until the early 1970s, I joined a team of extremely competitive young men, most of whom went on to make their mark in the industry. I did not find that a difficulty, and I found that I was treated with respect and friendship by the male members of the team, and I was actually given my opportunities by men because men were in charge of everything. So it was men who had to open the door for you. Anything I learned about telling stories with pictures, I learned from cameramen. I learned from camera crews. They were all men at that time. And I think that our camera crews were, and no doubt still are, among the best in the world. Well, I would say the best in the world. They were extremely resourceful. And I found that travelling overseas, we only travelled in those days, late 60s, 70s, in teams of 3. So there was me as a reporter, a cameraman and a sound recordist, only 3, no producers, no other support or backup. And so we I just found the men so resourceful. You know, we'd hit a foreign port and we'd have to hire vehicles or whatever, and they just did it all. And we were there with 16 pieces of luggage. We were pretty, you know, we didn't travel light in those days. And somehow they managed it all. And they would manage to drive the car on the wrong side of the road wherever we were, you know, depending on where we were. I had a happy experience working with men. You see, I always worked with men, and that was fine for me. However, the caveat is that as the years have gone on and I have become much more aware of the situation of women across the media, not only at the ABC, but in all other media organisations, I have heard some very unpleasant and harrowing stories about women who have not been treated with respect, have been talked over, passed over, and even worse, harassed and bullied. So I'm not setting up my experience as the norm, because sadly enough, it has not been. You know, the population's 50-50 men and women. The media certainly needs to be represented 50% at least, men and women. And also when you look at the statistics, although we are roughly half and half men and women when you look right across the scope of the media, then as you go higher into editorial, managerial, board, CEO positions, of course, the women become much fewer in number and the men dominate. And that really won't do. Some of the great highlights occurred when I was, for 8 years, from 1987 to 1994, broadcasting on Radio National, ABC Radio National, a program called The Search for Meaning. And it was really just drawing out stories of a great variety of men and women, how they'd come through their hard times, how they kept their faith in life. And it was really a wonderful exposition of the inner life, I suppose, of Australians. Something that was very moving in a way. It was also very humorous and very encouraging, but it was at a greater depth than the current affairs reporting, which happens on, I suppose, more on the surface. So for 8 years, I had the privilege of being the listener, being the one who drew out the stories. That was certainly a highlight. And interestingly enough, Deb Fleming, the founding executive producer of Australian Story, said to me that the Search for Meaning programs were one of the inspirations for Australian Story. And I think that is how she came to invite me to be part of the team which produced and still produces Australian Story. So yes, very definitely a highlight. But I'd like to mention another one because I think it's probably of more general interest. When I was a reporter on the pioneering current affairs program produced by the ABC in the late 60s and early 70s, I was based in Sydney and I looked into what we would now call the slum landlords, mostly large companies, development companies, which were buying up buildings which in some cases had actually been condemned because they were not fit to live in, and renting them out to people who were too poor to be able to afford any other sort of rental accommodation. So you had a lot of very disadvantaged people living in this very unsatisfactory range of accommodation. And we got onto that and did quite a lot of reporting on that subject. So it was good work in that it exposed something that was very wrong in our metropolitan societies. It happened to be Sydney, but I don't doubt that this was happening in other places as well. It was good work, and yet at a certain point, you have to finish the report because it has to go to air, and then you have to be put onto your next assignment. But the trouble with a story like that is that although these disadvantaged people have been kind enough and generous enough and taken the risk to talk to you about their plight, that's not the end of the story for them. The media has moved on. But reprisals can be taken by some of those landlords who didn't like this reporting, and in some cases actually evicted some of those disadvantaged people. So it occurred to me that we had made their situation worse, not better. It might have made a bit of a difference in the long term in that there was more awareness of what was happening. But for those people who gave us the privilege of talking to us, the story did not end, and in some cases it got worse. So we tried at the end of that reporting to keep in touch with some of those people, to do what we could to ameliorate their suffering. But you can't. You know, you've already exposed the problem, and you can't make it right for them. So that gave me a very, very strong insight into both the upside of journalism or reporting, in that one of our jobs is to shine a light into dark places and to hold the powerful to account, whether it be local government or state government or federal ministers or the heads of great corporations. I mean, that's one of our jobs, and that's all very well. But it's also to give a voice to the voiceless. But the insight was that sometimes in giving a voice to the voiceless, you were making them vulnerable. So in a way, and what crowned the whole thing was that I was given an award at the end of that particular year for contribution to television journalism. Well, I accepted it with a very heavy heart, because I'm standing there with a statue and thinking, yes, thank you very much. But what damage did it do, as well as what good did it do? So, I don't know, it's a dilemma for journalists, I think, but we need to be aware of it. And the award sat very heavily. And I've never liked receiving prizes ever since. Not that I've received that many, but it's always made me feel uncomfortable. Yes.